Hello, and welcome to the Brenton Peck Podcast. Today's guest is Rebekah Grindstaff, co-founder and co-director of the Care House Learning Center in Nampa, Idaho. With a background in child advocacy and nonprofit leadership, she has worked with families navigating foster care, domestic violence, and crisis. Out of those experiences, Rebekah helped build Care House Learning Center, a faith-based nonprofit offering affordable early childhood education and wraparound support for families who often feel left behind. In our conversation, we explore the story behind Care House Learning Center, the challenges of creating something new in a space full of barriers, and how her faith and calling have shaped both the work and her own life. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I wanted to go back. I mean, we were in school together at NNU at the start, and you were an engineering major. So
Yep.
what led you through school? Because you changed your degree.
Yeah. So I grew up out of state, and I actually graduated high school with my associate's degree. And, for Northwest Nazarene University, I don't know if they still do it, but at the time they said if you were going to be undecided, you had to take a class where you tried to figure out what you wanted to do. And I said, well, that seems dumb, because if I take this class and all of the things that you want me to, and I decide I want to do engineering, then I'm 6 months behind. And so I said, well, if that's what I'm considering, why don't I just dive in and see if it works? And fun fact, it didn't work. I came to NNU on a soccer scholarship and had never taken physics before, and got in over my head and realized it wasn't what I was passionate about. And so I switched out of engineering into communication science. So it's kind of like psychology meets business. And, fell in love with that, graduated 2.5 years later, and haven't looked back. Married an engineer, though, so it's almost the same.
Yeah. I thought I had heard at the time that you went into education, not comp-sci.
Nope. Communication science. I really enjoyed the science backing and the research, and just really getting into the nitty-gritty about why people do what they do. And it gave a great foundation to move forward, and it's a pretty flexible degree.
Yeah. So what did you do when you graduated?
Yeah. So when I graduated, I worked for a little bit in law as a paralegal out in Seattle. And then when my husband and I got married, he was still in Idaho, so I moved back, and I worked for the Court-Appointed Special Advocate Program, or CASA program, out in Boise.
What do they do there? I'm not familiar with that program.
Yeah. So across the nation, and specifically here in Idaho, there are volunteers who represent the best interest of children in foster care cases. So basically, when a child comes into foster care for a long time, the parents would have an attorney, the state would have an attorney, and then there would be a social worker that was kind of navigating between everyone to try to make sure that family was safe and healthy. But a judge in Washington state realized, hey, this is all about the kid or the kids, and no one in court is specifically designed to speak for them. And so it varies state by state how the program operates. But here in Idaho, if you are under the age of 12 and you encounter the foster care system, you come into the foster care system, you are appointed a guardian ad litem, also known as a court-appointed special advocate, to represent your best interest in court. And then if you're over 12, you get an attorney to say what you'd like to happen. So they kind of draw that line of, if you're 12, you probably know what you want, and you can just say that. If you're under 12, you're going to get a volunteer adult to come in and visit you in all the various places, right? So volunteers go to the kids' schools if they're school age. They go to the foster home. They observe visits with the parents. They meet with the parent, and they kind of take a deep dive into the case, and then report back to the judge and say, hey, here's what I found, and here's what I think would be beneficial for this child, and serve them well.
Nice. So my familiarity with the foster system is kind of limited. Isn't there some cases where they're just temporary foster? So you're talking more long-term foster care, right?
Yeah. So a guardian ad litem is appointed at the shelter care hearing, which it occurs about 48 hours after the child has been removed from the family's home. And so if a case closes in that 48-hour window, they probably won't have a guardian ad litem assigned to the case. But if it remains open beyond that, then typically there is a volunteer assigned. But again, it's mandated by the state. There's actually legislation that says that kids should have one. However, there aren't enough volunteers or funding to go around, so it can be an unfunded mandate.
What do you mean by unfunded mandate? Like, is that just a friend that kind of steps in, or?
No, what I mean is it's something that is legally required, but not actually paid for by the state.
Okay.
So the legislation says if you're under 12 and you're in foster care, you need to have this person. But it's a unpaid program. It's all volunteer based. So if whatever nonprofit in the area that's running it doesn't have a volunteer for it, then it just kind of can slip through the cracks.
Do they attempt to fill it in? Like, if there's no one to fill that because it's a mandate, do they fill it with like a social worker or someone who is paid to like fill that extra gap?
It depends on the county. Some counties, and my information is several years outdated, but when I was in that field, it would depend on the county, and often if there was not a volunteer to do the work, then whatever nonprofit organization was running the program would be expected to fill it with a paid staff member, or occasionally they instead would just appoint an attorney to represent that child.
Okay.
So even if they were 12 months old, an attorney would be responsible for expressing the wishes of their client.
So when you were working with that, how many clients on average did you or other people in that role handle at a time? Because it sounds like a lot of work to go in and view the school, view the home, view all that.
Yeah. So my job was primarily to supervise the volunteers doing the work. So on average, I supervised between 15 and 30 volunteers every month, and each of them had between 1 and 6 cases each. So I would estimate I probably worked or had a hand in upwards of 500 cases in my time at that program, at that organization.
That's a lot. When you're talking about individual cases, is that a case per child, or were there sibling groups? Is that one case, or is that multiple cases?
Typically, in the jurisdictions I was in, a case would encompass the whole family. The only time that wouldn't necessarily be true is, let's say, kids enter foster care, and then mom becomes pregnant with a new baby, and a new baby is born, and perhaps that baby is drug exposed. That child would come into foster care, but under a new case number, even though it's related.
That makes sense. So is this part of inspiration for later moving into like Care House Learning Center? Is that part of what inspired this, what all you saw during this time?
Yeah. So, the individuals that work with foster youth, obviously, like, they're responding to a family in crisis, right? Kids are not removed from their families for no reason. Something really horrific has to happen. And so it's a real heartbreaking tragedy to be sitting in court and hearing about what children and families and adults have gone through. And there's a lot of generational trauma and generational experiences. The number of times that I had biological parents that they themselves had been foster youth was really heartbreaking to see that cycle continuing. And so, yeah, it absolutely was a motivator to starting the Learning Center. Working in the foster care system felt really like it was a really impactful and meaningful work. And also that by the time we were serving families, it was often late. And there were little pieces that seemed like they could make a pretty dramatic difference in preventing families from having to interact with that system to begin with. For example, one of the most devastating cases for me, when I was still relatively newer at the job, in one year we had 5 kids pass away. And one of those cases really stuck out to me, because it was a young girl, and she she ended up passing away from the injuries that she sustained. Basically, mom was a single parent. She had a new boyfriend and she had to go to work, and she left her daughter in the care of a new boyfriend. And, I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know that anybody ever necessarily will. But what we do know is that that child suffered catastrophically because mom didn't have a safe caregiver for her young child. And so, what would that have looked like if mom had daycare that was affordable and accessible, that she trusted that she could leave her child with so that she could go to work, right? And so time and again, I would see parents making these impossible choices and, potentially leaving their kids with unsafe people because they were stuck with bad options. Do I not work and then not have any funds to pay for the groceries and the rent and clothes for my children? Or do I work and then leave my kids with a questionably safe caretaker? Do I trust that neighbor that's next to me that I don't really know, but I have to go to work? So what do I do? And I saw case after case where it was like wrong place, wrong time. Parents are stuck with bad options and they don't have a solution. And then at the end of the day, it ends up falling apart and their kids entering care.
That sounds heartbreaking to deal with.
Yeah, it was. Maybe it's something that I should have expected walking into that field, but it wasn't. I think if I'd gone into medicine, you get the conversation of like, hey, by the way, people are going to die. But that wasn't in my orientation packet as a fresh out of college young professional of like, hey, by the way, heads up, kids might die. That wasn't something that we covered in my training. And so I think when you have something devastating happen like that, you're left with the question of, do I quit? Like, do I say, this is too much, it's not working, I don't want to do this? Or do you say, okay, that was untenable and like, this is unacceptable and no child deserves or should ever die because their parent doesn't have daycare. Like, that's dumb. And so what can we do about it? And so I leaned into option number 2. And so that's why I went back to school to get my master's in business. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it yet, but it felt impossible to just do nothing.
So you were going back to get your master's with the intention of doing something. You just didn't know what yet, but to set yourself up to walk down a path.
Yeah. So I'd been in the nonprofit world long enough at that point to recognize I saw a lot of people around me with really good heart and wanting to do some pretty tremendous and impactful things. But oftentimes you have folks that come into the field that don't have the financial expertise or the money savvy or a business plan, right? Lots of heart, not a business plan. And so thinking, how can I better equip myself and those around me to solve this problem well?
Yeah. So you went for your master's in business. Were there particular things you focused on in school to set up for that? Or was it just kind of a general path, not sure where you were going with it yet?
Yeah, at the time my focus was in management, just because that felt like it was pretty broadly applicable. The other thing that I had noticed in nonprofits is that formalized management training isn't really there, right? The majority of nonprofits across the United States are small organizations. And so, it's not like your HP or your JP Morgan where you've got the leadership training built in on the job. They're so small, that's not a reality. And so I focused on taking courses that I felt would be beneficial in the moment with, I was supervising volunteers the entire time I was at that program. But then it felt very translatable for future.
Nice. So before we go any further, I want to go back just a little bit. What would you say some of the biggest challenges you saw in managing the volunteers? Not necessarily the kids' cases, but in working with the volunteers.
I think the heartbreaking thing for volunteers was they would often come to the same realization that I had come to, that it never felt like we were doing enough. And, a volunteer could spend a month and a half, getting to know a family and diving in deep and writing a thorough report. And then we could go to court and nothing would change. And that was really devastating for many of our volunteers. And so I think that was probably the hardest part of, maintaining morale and saying, no, what you're doing matters when, it's a challenging system and it's very slow to move. And oftentimes, you're not going to get the outcomes that you necessarily hope for.
Yeah. I'm a little curious if there's ways to tie in mental health support for volunteers. I would assume there's some level of mental health support available for the kids as part of taking care of them, but I'm curious on the volunteers, and I could be wrong on the kids.
Sure. So, when a child comes into foster care, in the past, perhaps this has changed today, but in the past, they were not automatically provided with mental health support. And that could be for a variety of reasons. But it's not an automatic thing that happens. So no, there's not always mental health support for these kids, even though there probably should be in some measure or another. For volunteers, we provided support groups and mentorship programs, which I think were beneficial and helpful for navigating that. But when I was training volunteers, I always recommended counseling. It wasn't something that we could pay to provide to our volunteers, but I recommended it as something that was meaningful. And the other complicating factor is these cases are confidential. So you can't share with your significant other or spouse or your family what's going on. And so, as a volunteer, you're given the keys to the kingdom and you learn all of these intimate details about a family, good, bad, or otherwise. And then you're left to carry that alone. And so my recommendation was always to go to counseling, or to have, because in a counseling relationship, that information is held private, and they could talk about it safely. Otherwise, the only people they could really talk to were the volunteer coordinators.
Yeah. I'm now jumping a little ahead. I'm curious, is that something you can tie into like Care House Learning Center, where maybe you have like a staff therapist that can be available for kids or for volunteers or something like that? Like the wheels are just turning. How do you tie in and fill this gap?
Yeah. So Care House Learning Center has only been around since we founded in 2022, and we opened our doors to serving families in 2023. So we're still relatively new. My dream long-term is, yes, what a great idea. I would love to have a staff therapist. What I would really love is to have a play therapist on staff, specifically for the kids, and then have them specialize in parent-child relationships, and then be able to also offer free counseling to our staff members and volunteers. My money tree hasn't grown yet, so we're not there. However, we have been able to foster some great relationships with community partners to be able to offer counseling. So our sister organization, Care House Partnerships, offers counseling services for free and reduced charge right across the street from us, literally like 20 feet from us. And so that is accessible now to families. And then Families ETC is associated with Northwest Nazarene University, and they are also super accessible. So right now we're leaning into our community partners, but long term, yeah, that'd be great.
Nice. What does funding look like for Care House Learning Center? Like, how do you go about getting some of that funding and the community engagement? Because I think you're somewhat volunteer supported. Maybe volunteer is not the right word. Donation supported.
Yeah.
How do you get that outreach or get people to help support that and grow that?
Great question. So our first year of operations, we just happened to have good timing. So there was a lot of American Rescue Package funds left over from COVID, and there was a huge void in childcare providers because many childcare providers in Idaho had to shut down during COVID because of the different regulations, and just kids get really sick pretty easily, even in a normal cold and flu season. And so providers shut down. They just couldn't swing it. And so we were able to initially start thanks to grant funding from the state of Idaho and the Workforce Development Council. So that was a grant program. And then since then, we've been able to sustain operations through childcare payments. So that's about 60% of our budget. And then the remaining part of our 40% of our budget is donations and then smaller foundation grants.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you envision growing beyond the one location and expanding reach?
Yeah. So right now we're in the phase where we've already helped several organizations kind of work through the logistics of starting a faith-based center at their own church. When we began this process, my co-director, Kenzie Emerson, and I recognized that most churches don't use their nursery space 90% of the time. And so it's a really untapped potential. And the other cool thing is the majority of those spaces are actually designed with health code in mind. And so often they already work for the state requirements without having to change a whole lot. So right now we're in the phase of we have made our business plan available to other churches and nonprofit organizations that want to replicate what we're doing. We provided, coaching and support and, whatever resources we possibly can. But yeah, long term, we'd love to maybe formalize that and make it more of a toolkit that's more accessible. And yeah, I mean, if we could expand, that would be fantastic. Right now, the cost of expanding is pretty cost prohibitive. But we're only on year 3 and Rome wasn't built in a day.
No. I'm curious how you mentor and help those other churches start that. Is that more going out and having in-person meetings, scheduling seminars? What does that look like? Because you have the business degree, you have some of that knowledge and background that I'm guessing a lot of the people that want to start this up don't have that same base to build on.
Yeah. So, we've done a lot of in-person kind of coffee brainstorming sessions. We've done a lot of email communication with folks. I had the opportunity to present at PalCon recently to share about uniting faith and finance and kind of how we went about starting. So, it's fairly ad hoc at the moment. There's nothing quite as organized as a seminar. Long term, it would be great to be able to offer that. But yeah, right now it is, as we are reached out to, we respond and do what we can and provide whatever support is possible. The other thing that we do is there's some existing, community resources that are pretty helpful for starting a business. The Small Business Development Center will give you free coaching and a free business plan. And that's what they do all day, every day. And it's free and they have a little more capacity than I do. So when folks are coming to us, I'm not going to write your business plan for you, but I can send you to somebody who will do a better job than I could and will be really helpful. So we do a lot of that connection.
Connecting people to the right resources and where they should go.
Exactly.
So, going back to the kids a little bit, I believe you guys served, did you say ages 0 through 4 for the Learning Center?
Yeah, so we serve kids ages 6 weeks to when they go to kindergarten. So typically that's like 6 weeks to 5 years old. But on occasion, we've got a kid with a late birthday and they happen to turn 6 right before they graduate from us. That's during the school year. We did just start a summer program. So kids ages 6 through 10 can also come during the summer for our summer program. We see a dip in our enrollment for the younger kids. And so we're able to bring on some older students and do themed summer camps. And it's been a lot of fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
On a couple episodes, I think I've talked about like one of the pivotal age ranges for development is ages 0 through 4. And that has been a huge fear of mine because that's a pivotal age for learning to interact socially. So when we locked down for COVID, a lot of them didn't have that. And there's been research that has shown like if you don't learn to socialize in that age range, it's something like 95% of them struggle the rest of their lives because they're not able to find peers that will let them join their group to learn after that point. So I'm curious, like, is that part of Care House Learning Center where you're bringing some of those people who were maybe a little more challenged in that area. And then you're fostering an environment to help them out of that 95% statistic to actually learn better socialization skills.
Yeah. So, are you familiar with adverse childhood experiences and the 5 protective factors?
I'm not.
Okay. So, Google adverse childhood experiences after this. You'll enjoy reading into it, I'm sure. About 25, 30 years ago, Kaiser Permanente did a study, and they looked at all of these like successful adults that happened to have some kind of out of the blue negative health outcomes. What specifically triggered it was a obesity study and folks that just were not able to lose weight, and they could not figure out why. And come to find out that when they surveyed these adults, they found that the vast majority of them had had what they considered an adverse childhood experience. So they had experienced some kind of abuse or neglect, or incarcerated parent, divorcing parent, substance use in the home, mental health in the home, etc. And those negative experiences didn't just emotionally impact them. Their body literally internalized it into having negative health outcomes. So if you have any of what I just mentioned happen to you in your childhood, especially if you have more than one happen, the likelihood that you're going to have a negative health outcome like mental health disorder, substance use, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, etc., cancer, obesity, whatever, goes up significantly. And so when they've been doing research to try to figure out like, okay, this is obviously bad. We know that when a bad thing happens to a child, not only is there all of the emotional baggage and stuff that they have to work through, but then there's also this very clear link that says your body is struggling to deal with what happened. So how do we fix it? Like, how do we make it better? Because it's pretty easy to say like, well, you're just broken forever. And that's not an answer. We believe in a redemptive God. So to just say, bummer, that isn't an answer. So what they've found is that when you strengthen protective factors for families and children, you can help mitigate the impact of those adverse experiences. So one of the strengthening and protective factors is social and emotional competence of children. So we do a lot of that at the Learning Center. The average day incorporates a lot of food. We serve 4 meals a day, and then we do circle time for some, structured learning activities. If you want to know more about the learning stuff, interview my co-director. And then the rest of the day is spent working on free play and building those social connections, because the way that you foster healthy social connections is through play. And kids just figuring out what it looks like and navigating those. And when is it okay to bite Susie? Fun fact, never. And so, that's one of the things that we do. And then the whole concept of the Learning Center is, we're working on strengthening. Sorry, I talk with my hands, so I'm not afraid of the mic, but I am going to hit it. The whole concept of the Learning Center is we're going to try to build those. So, social and emotional competency of children. The next one is concrete supports in times of need. And so that's like, oh, my fridge died and I lost all of the groceries that I just bought and I don't have money for more. Well, guess what? We literally are across the parking lot from a food bank. On more than one occasion, we have wandered over, gotten a box of food, and that family is stocked until they get paid again. Other things are like when a family can normally pay their bill, but they just can't because they got sick and their hours got cut. We have donations. We're able to say, hey, we got you. We'll cover this. So we're able to be that concrete support in times of need. And if we can't help, we can help you find someone who can, right? We had a parent that got in a car accident and it was terrible timing and they didn't have any funds to do it. We were able to find some shops that were able to, that would be willing to give them support if they needed it, right? So it's knowing somebody that you can lean on. That's us. We can be that somebody. The other piece is knowledge of parenting and child development. And so, if you have unrealistic expectations, like you think your 1-year-old should be unloading the dishwasher and folding your laundry, it is going to be a rough parenting road.
Yes.
And so we partner with the kindergarten readiness project and the Ready for Kindergarten program to offer parenting and educational courses so that parents know, like, what can I expect from my kid? And then how can I actually get them ready for school? The other piece is social support. So we offer socialization events like family nights. We also do educational classes for families, and like budgeting and food preparation, and I'm trying to think of the other one we had this last year, but it's completely escaping me. And so whenever we're doing anything at the Learning Center, we're trying to go through those factors and say, okay, are we helping? Are we strengthening this family? Are we making this better?
Yeah. Nice. I can't say I have a huge depth of psychology knowledge. Most of what I know, I took like 2 classes, intro to psych and cultural psych. And then I've watched a lot of podcasts. My primary one has been Jordan Peterson, who's a clinical psychologist. But he's a huge advocate for play. That's how you actually learn, which is why if you don't learn to socialize in that 0 to 4, you're kind of shunned from a social group, and then you're not able to play. And so I have 2 thoughts here. You're fostering some of that play, allowing an area for that play. But the second thought on top of that for me is a lot of times play is mimicking what you've seen. So how do you provide, I guess, good examples? Maybe they had rough areas at home and they're trying to incorporate. How do you supplement and provide good examples for their to mimic in their play?
Yeah. So I think that's where your staff really comes in to play, because the team that you have working with your students makes all the difference. And so, especially at the younger ages, right? Until you're about like 2 or 3, you're not really actually playing with others. Like, you kind of play near them, but you're not in that developmental stage where you're playing with someone.
Yeah.
So the cool part about that is, especially if a kid starts with us from the beginning, we have this unique opportunity to show them how to play. So in our infant class, I was just in there observing today, and the teacher had this fun monkey toy that when you pulled it, it made music. And so she went around and she was modeling, like, this is what it does. Okay, it's your turn. You're going to do it. Okay, it's your turn. You're going to do it. And so especially in our, 0 to 2 class and our 2 to 3 class, the teacher is literally on the floor playing with the kids and showing them, like, this is how we share. This is how I take turns. This is how I'm going to play with this toy. Is that how you'd like to do it? And here's how we're going to organize this so that everybody gets an opportunity to try it. And then as they get older, it's a little bit more playing referee as needed. But when we've seen the best outcomes, when we have the kids that we can really do that modeling at the beginning.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, you talked about support for the families and I guess a more holistic whole living situation, not just the kids, but you're trying to support everything. And some of that, like, kids are going to do the best when the family unit is doing good. So taking care of that whole area makes sense to me in a lot of ways. I have so many things trying to connect right now. Community is huge in a lot of things. So you're providing support and stability for some of these families as they need it. But how can we provide better community and more feeling of support than just in one place? Like, you're connecting them with people who can step in at points of need, but is there anything we can do to provide a more stable foundational community that they can always lean on?
Short answer is yes. I think you've opened kind of a can of worms, because even pre-COVID, but especially now post-COVID, the ability and capacity for individuals to be able to engage meaningfully in in-person interaction, I think, has decreased. I also think that for parents, there's a lot of expectation, especially as kids get older and with, kind of outside events. So I don't have a good solid answer for you other than the way that we find value in making community is, number one, hosting events so that families have an easy way to connect with us. We found that when we can stage an event around dinner time and offer food, then that kind of automatically makes it a little bit easier for that family, because it's like, oh, now I don't have to cook, and you're already doing this at pickup time, so it's less challenging for me to incorporate this into my schedule. But then the other piece is making sure that people feel welcome coming into the church space, because I think the church fills that role of community, or at least it should be, and is really trying to. And so, there's a lot of, if you are not a regular church attender, and even if you are, it's pretty intimidating to go into a space that you are unfamiliar with. And so, in my opinion, anytime we are able to get somebody to walk through the doors of the church and not immediately want to run away, I think that that's breaking down barriers to being able to engage in that community. So the fact that, our parents are walking by the line for Wednesday night dinners, and they see Celebrate Recovery, doing band practice when they're coming to pick up their kids, I think all of those things are planting seeds and slowly reducing the fear that might come with engaging in a community that is unknown to you. So do I think that we could grow and do better at that? Absolutely. But I also think that it takes time, right? Like, we had a family that attended with us a couple years ago, like right when we opened, and they're no longer with us now, but they came to Wednesday night dinner after months of walking by the sign, and they were like, the kids asked about it, so we just thought we'd come. And they were like, the food is really good. I'm surprised, right? But it took 6 months before they walked in there. And then, even though they don't come to the Learning Center anymore, they came back for VBS.
Nice.
And so, to me, that's a sign that community is working, because they felt safe enough to come back into the space, even though the connection with the center was gone.
Yeah.
So,
there's other nonprofits and programs that come to mind that I think are working to build some community, but also support to help people in need, like Love Inc. Mm-hmm. Do you interplay with some of those other nonprofits at all?
Yeah. So our engagement with Love Inc. has been in passing. However, yes, short version is we work really hard to make sure that we're collaborating with nonprofits as much as we can, and that we're not duplicating resources. It's a big pet peeve of mine when organizations duplicate something that's already exists in the community, because that just seems like wasted dollars and effort. There's limited dollars. We might as well stretch it to go as far as we can. And so, we partner with Envision, which is a local vision organization, and they come out and do free hearing and vision screenings for our kids every year. Southwest District Health comes out and does a free dental examination for our kids, as well as like fluoride application, giving toothbrushes, etc. Because dental health doesn't just start when you're an adult. you gotta do it from the beginning. Matthew 25 Ministries is down the street, and they provide our families in need with coats when the winter gets cold and we need some warmth. We've had partnerships with the Boise Rescue Mission. We've actually had a couple families come from there to receive services with us. The Nampa Family Justice Center, we helped with childcare for some of their classes for a time, and they have often sent us clients, and so we're able to serve those fleeing interpersonal violence in all its forms. And so yes, we are constantly looking for ways that we can collaborate. And like I said before, if a family needs something and we don't have it, the thing that we love to do is find where they can get it, because we may not be the experts, but I'm sure we can find someone who is.
Yeah. I just lost my train of thought. I am really curious on some of the other psychological impacts of the kids. You mentioned the ACE tests, and as you were mentioning that, I recognized it afterwards. Mm-hmm. That's typically a scoring range that shows you at risk. I'm curious, is there more research or connections coming out that you're building onto as you continue to grow? I'm not familiar with a lot of the more recent research.
Yeah. So We don't score our students using the ACE evaluation, primarily because it wouldn't change what we're doing. Instead, the tools that we use are, the ages and stages developmental milestones, to make sure that we're catching kids in time. There are some really great programs in the community, specifically the infant toddler program, supports kids ages 0 to 3 with making sure that they're on track to meet their developmental milestones. It makes sense when you think about it, but it was news to me when I first was introduced to the program. But if you are not rolling over in time, that can actually impact your ability to eat solid foods, which can in turn impact your ability to form words later, because it's all related, right? Tummy time and being able to roll over means you have a strong core. And if you have a strong enough core, then you can start eating, and that works your muscles so that then you know how to talk, right? And so when we do those ages and stages evaluations on our kids consistently, it means that we're able to catch and say oh, it looks like this kid, could potentially be behind. And we can work with families and say, hey, do you want to access this free program to get any support that they may need? And, sometimes the assessment comes back and the kid's fine, and it's just nice to know that everything's okay. And then sometimes the assessment comes back and that kid might need occupational therapy, or they might need feeding therapy or physical therapy. And the cool part, if we catch it early, is that the state program is free. And so until a kid turns 3 years old, we can really intervene and catch them sooner. And so we use the ages and stages questionnaire for that. And then we also use a tool called the Ready for Kindergarten target levels. It has a lot of similar themes, but basically it's saying, if you're going to be ready for kindergarten, working backwards, what do you need to do when you're 6 months old. And so that's the other tool that we use to say what interventions could be needed for this family and how can we help.
Nice. Is there plans to expand age ranges, or is this mostly going to stay focused on that pre-K age range?
Right now, we feel pretty strongly that we want to keep serving this age range and do it with excellence. And physical constraint wise, we are licensed for up to 80 kids, but we really are only comfortable having about 50 in the space just because of the size of the rooms and the staffing and all of that. And so, would we like to expand in the future and serve a wide age range? Yes. If you have millions of dollars and want to talk to me, I would love to hear.
Logistics become challenging.
The logistics become challenging, for sure.
And the reason I ask that is what comes to mind. There's a lot of families that are going to be struggling that need that childcare, but that have more than one kid. So maybe they can get one child in for that childcare, but what do they do with the other ones? Do you have other resources you point them to?
Yeah. So the nice part about having the support of the community is that we're able to reach out and make connections. So on our board of directors, we've got the principal of Central Elementary School and several local educators and folks with some education and nonprofit experience. So the short version is, if we aren't the right fit, we work hard to make sure that we can find someone that is. The biggest thing that we would see that could be challenging is if you've got a kid who's not yet school age and then kids that are school age. And so the Boys and Girls Club of Nampa does a really good job of offering a pretty affordable childcare option for after school. And then the Nampa Parks and Recreation also has a pretty affordable program that you're able to connect folks with. And then there's actually a great program through the YMCA in partnership with Central Elementary that has another one. So that's nice because it's literally like the Boys and Girls Club is 5 minutes from us, and the YMCA program out of Central is across the street. So those are good options if a family qualifies income-wise.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm curious on some of the logistics in Carroll's Learning Center as far as how do you staff? How are you able to find qualified teachers while being on potentially a more limited budget, because a lot of it's going to be donation based?
Yeah. So from the beginning, my co-director and I and our board felt very strongly that if we couldn't do this right, we didn't deserve to be doing it at all. And so we offer pretty competitive wages. At one point, it was one of the highest in Nampa for childcare providers, which that may sound like I'm bragging. Childcare providers are paid abysmally, so that's not really that much of an accomplishment, but it's something that we're proud to be able to offer. And so we pay a competitive wage for the industry. We also offer short-term disability, life insurance. We offer a healthcare option, as well as ancillary benefits like dental, vision, etc. And we offer paid time off. And as much as this may be shocking in the childcare field, despite the fact that you work in a germ factory, paid time off is not a given. It is not often provided to employees. And so that's definitely been something that folks find attractive. The other thing is that we do offer retirement for folks, so 401k, if they're interested. So
Nice.
we try to offer the competitive wage, but then also the benefits to go along with it so that they can, hopefully be with us for a long time. The other piece is that we're committed to supporting folks in their education. And so, if they really want to do early childhood education, there are some great low-cost programs that we can help folks get, including getting their associate's degree. And they can do that like while they're working, and we can help subsidize the cost of that.
Nice.
So those are, yeah. But it is hard because we're stingy about who we hire. We want to make sure that when we're hiring staff, we're not just getting folks that tolerate children. We want you to ooze for kids and love Jesus.
Yes.
And that's hard to find. So sometimes it takes a bit.
Is it additionally challenging because you're newer versus like a more established business that people may be a little concerned about longevity?
We have not encountered that specific issue. I think the hardest part for me has been coming from more, from a different field. The level of professionalism in specifically interviewing has been surprising to me. We have a lot of folks no-show our interviews, which makes it easy to know that they're not a good fit. But it was just shocking to me because I hadn't had that experience in past hiring.
Yeah. I worked in a daycare actually in Ohio as a substitute teacher for a year. And it was at a mega church, Gingensburg United Methodist. I mean, they averaged like 6,500 people across 5 services, Saturday, Sunday. But then they had a full-time daycare the whole year round. Massive scale. I floated around, filling in for breaks and stuff. Like I wasn't a full teacher or anything. But I saw the impact and reach that those kinds of programs can have on those kids.
Yeah.
I just got to be the fun one. I earned the nickname the Gingerbread Man because I would just play and run around and just always stay out of reach.
Yep.
But what I was meaning a little bit when I asked if it's harder to find employees is if you're not well established, you might not have a name that reaches out to the community everywhere yet. So I would imagine some of attracting talent is branding, familiarity with name, getting that out in front of people so people are even aware you're hiring. How do you handle a lot of the branding and putting your name out there in the community for people to even be aware of you?
Yeah, that has definitely been more of an issue with getting donations and community involvement, but that hasn't been our experience with hiring. Unfortunately, the childcare industry has incredibly high turnover rates, and so teachers don't stay in childcare for very long, and the teachers that I've met don't necessarily care about your name. They care more about whether or not you're going to treat them well, and they're not going to take that based on anybody else's say-so. It's going to be what you do in the moment.
So it's not so much word of mouth hiring.
No, like we post on Indeed, we share with the church when we're hiring, and then our existing employees will refer folks if they think they're a good fit.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm a little curious on some of the marketing, putting your name out there for donations. Since you mentioned that, like you mentioned for parents and stuff, you do like dinners. Do you do like fundraiser dinners? How do you get out for that awareness?
Yeah. So Nampa First Church of the Nazarene has been a huge help to us. They give us our space basically for free. And then they allow us to use office space again for free, printing services. We are highly supported by the church. And part of why we're able to offer what we are is because we don't have to worry about a building expense and a lot of the overhead that other organizations have to. And so we are very, very fortunate in that respect. And that includes donations, right? Because we have an audience as part of the church already. So that definitely helped us survive our first few years. And recently we've been in the process of trying to get the community more familiar with who we are and what we do. Now that we've really educated the church and leaned in so that most of the time, if you say Care House Learning Center, people will at least have a vague idea of what you're talking about at Nampa First Church. Now we've, we're reached out in the community, and a lot of my job is going out and doing community presentations, book clubs and Rotary and Kiwanis and, B&I groups and community roundtables. All of those are organizations that we go and we talk to and we say, hey, here's what we're doing. Here are projects that you can help with, etc. And then, of course, we also do fundraisers. And so actually coming up on October 3rd is our second annual dinner and auction fundraiser. That's our big one. But then we also participate in Giving Tuesday, Idaho Gives. We do annual campaigns, things like that. So
nice. What about on the political side? Are there ways you can tie in for more donations or grants through the state or other things?
No. So our tax-exempt status is 501c3, which limits any political activism that we may participate in.
Okay.
We can apply for state grants. However, since ARPA dollars were spent, there have not been a ton of state grants that we qualify for. We have had more success with smaller local foundations.
Okay. I don't know all the different intricacies. I was meaning more on grants, not necessarily political involvement, but I was curious what that looked like. Is there differences at the city level? Can the city create new grants, or the state, or even at the national level? I don't know what any of that looks like.
I mean, to my knowledge, which I am not, do not take this as tax advice or legal advice, seek counsel from the appropriate people. But to my knowledge, anybody can establish a grant. We have been in contact with the mayor of Nampa and the city council. And to our knowledge, there is not grants or funding available for organizations like ours. At the state level, we continue to keep tabs on the various programs that are available, but Idaho's appetite for funding childcare services is not great. I don't know if you remember this time last year, the state of Idaho actually paused all new applications for the Idaho Childcare Program, which is the acronym is ICCP. And basically, at that point, you could make, I want to say, 200% of the federal poverty line and qualify for that program. And they said during peak enrollment season, no new applications. We get the most applications between August and October, and they shut the program down in the middle of August with 2 days notice to us after we had already opened a brand new classroom that we needed to fill. And so they finally reopened the program in January and have now dropped the income eligibility to 130% of the federal poverty line. And so families that did qualify under the past rules now no longer qualify and are being kicked off the program. And so one of the things that makes the Learning Center unique is that we've recognized for a long time that ICCP is a valuable program and that it doesn't serve and meet the needs of everyone. And so we want to make sure that we can be there to bridge the gap. So let's say you make 135% of the poverty line. bummer, you don't get this program that, let's say you've got 3 kids. That's, if you wanted to put your kids in childcare, we're going to round and say it'll probably cost you about, on the nice edge, $2,500, on the higher end, $5,000 a month to put your kids in care. Okay. Big range, but still a lot of money.
Yeah.
If you qualified for ICCP, they would cover probably about 70% of that, but you make 5% too much. And so now you're magically expected to come up with this extra money. And so we recognize there's folks that are working really hard and they need childcare to work their jobs, and it's still incredibly expensive. And so we offer families sliding scale rates. So if you don't qualify for ICCP, we take a look at your family size and your income, and we say, okay, we have these sliding scale rates. So the more money you make, the less discount you get. But we can still help you even if you don't qualify for ICCP. The other cool part about that is that, let's say a family is working really hard to graduate off of state assistance. Many of the families we serve, go on state assistance for a time, and they want to eventually be able to get off of it. But we know that the way jobs work is typically you don't go from making $15 an hour to $60 an hour overnight. And yet, if you qualify for state assistance, most of the time that means that you're going to qualify for the childcare assistance. It often means that you or your kids may qualify for Medicaid and healthcare assistance. And it might also mean that you qualify for food stamps. Well, depending on the size of your family, that can be a pretty large amount of benefit that you're receiving. But if you accept an incremental wage increase, like let's say instead of just $15 an hour, now you're making $15.50. Well, that could be enough that you could lose all of those benefits overnight. And like we just talked about, that could be thousands of dollars worth of benefits when if you only make 50 cents an hour more, that's not thousands of dollars more in your pocket every month. And so to ease that burden on families, we're able to come in and say, yes, we want to support you as you're, going back to school or taking these incremental job, wage increases. And, we'll be here, and you don't immediately overnight have to start paying $1,000 for your child's care when you were paying $150 kind of thing.
Yeah. Something that comes to mind is you obviously care about the whole family, not just the kids that are coming in. But you also can't overextend yourself. So how do you find that balance of we're going to do as much as we can, but we can't provide everything? You already mentioned part of that is in connecting people with the right people to fill other gaps. But I would imagine you probably have hundreds of ideas of all the things you want or wish you could do. How do you decide what you're going to focus on?
Yeah. Well, a lot of prayer. And the leadership of our board has been helpful in kind of fostering that vision and making sure that we're moving forward in a sustainable way. The other thing has been, I had a mentor early in my career, and she had a really great way of sharing, like, okay, you only have this bucket of resources. Like, this is what you have to work with. And you have all of these things that you want to do. And if you try to do all of them, you're going to fail at all of them. And so how do you want to prioritize your time? And so just kind of coming back to that every time to say, we can do a few things really well. Let's focus on the things that we can do really well. So one of the big pieces to that logistically is 50% of the families we serve receive some kind of assistance to attend, and the remaining 50% do not. And so I wish that we could say yes to every family that came through our door needing financial assistance. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. And so, once we've met our thresholds for both of those things, then we can't accept anymore.
Yeah.
So just knowing our limits and knowing that if we say yes too often, then that actually undermines the good.
Yeah. If you had to go back when you were working, like for the 4th Judicial District, what advice would you have given yourself back then from everything that you've learned through this journey?
I don't know that I necessarily would have given advice, but I think I would have given hope. Because it, secondary trauma is real, and there were some really hard seasons in there. And so knowing that it does get better and we can get on the front end of this would probably be just the encouragement that I would share.
Nice.
Yeah. And we did kind of skip the middle part of my jobs because that was also pretty impactful for why we started the Learning Center.
So let's go back to it.
All right. So after I was done working at the court-appointed special advocate program, I worked for a crisis center in Boise that served folks who were fleeing interpersonal violence. So sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, elder abuse, stalking, harassment, etc. And the pivotal things that stuck out that really motivated the Learning Center, and I think kind of caused Kenzie and I to really act on it, was I would see parents, and most of the time it was single mothers, trying to flee an abuser. And in every single one of these cases, the abuser said, "You are not allowed to work. Your job is to be home with the kids, and you don't get to have access to any money, and you can't have a car, and you don't get a social life, and I get to be abusive whenever I want to be," right? And so these primarily moms would come to us most of the time like actively bloody and bruised. Like either they'd be brought in by law enforcement or they'd come to us, immediately after an event happened and say like, "I want out, I need help, what can I do?" And that time is really crucial because if you are familiar with folks trying to leave domestic violence, it often takes somebody up to 7 times before they leave, because leaving is the most dangerous time, because the abuser feels like they're losing control, they're losing the power. And so it's really unsafe for somebody to try to leave. And that causes there to be a lot of second guessing and a lot of going back to somebody who's clearly not safe. But when you are especially when you have kids involved and you don't have access to money, what are you supposed to do when this person has restricted your access to everything and you can't drive and you don't have a job and you don't have a place to live and you don't. And so the cases where I saw the person was able to leave and go stand on their 2 feet was when they were able to get a coveted childcare spot that was affordable. So there's an organization in Boise called Giraffe Laugh that does something very similar to what we do. They're just not faith-based, and they offer sliding scale rates. They accept ICCP. They've been around for like 30 years, and they have wait lists miles long. Like, I kid you not, they're so busy and they never have any room. And so, our first call when somebody had a childcare need was obviously to them to say like, "Hey, do you have room?" And almost never did they have room. But on a handful of occasions, they did. And the folks who were able to leave successfully were almost always those families that had a safe childcare center that they could take their kids to so that they could actually have a job and go back to work, or go to work for the first time ever, depending on how the abuse panned out, and be able to sustain their family. Because the longer they stayed in that cycle of like, "I don't have a job, I don't have a way to support my family, I don't have anyone to take care of my kids." Like, if you don't have childcare, you can't go to court to face your abuser. You can't file a protection order to make sure that they don't get near you. You can't press charges. Like, how are you going to sit in interviews for hours and hours if you don't have care, right? Like, crisis centers come in and they do everything they can, but if you don't have a place that you can leave your kids with, what are you going to do? And then the same thing goes for like, okay, a crisis center can help me for maybe the first 6 to 12 weeks, but then I will probably still have medical appointments, right? Like, what if I broke my jaw and I need follow-up appointments? I can't take my 5 kids with me to a medical appointment. I can't take them to my counseling that I probably am going to need. What do I do with my kids? Well, I do all of these things that I have to do to move forward, but I can't. And so childcare it is not the only thing. Like, don't hear me saying that it's a silver bullet, because it's not, because we still need affordable housing and we still need competitive wages for folks and we still need a social safety net, and. But childcare matters.
I see that being a huge barrier, because I want to be careful how I'm saying this, like, we can take a huge amount of abuse on ourselves as parents in order to protect our kids. But if there's a way to get our kids so that they're safe, now we can stand up for ourselves. Like, there's an element, I think, to being a parent where you would do anything for your kids. So if that means my kids are somewhat safe, I'm willing to endure something that I really shouldn't endure or have to. So I kind of see that as not the only thing, like you said, but the biggest hump to get over.
Yeah, and abusers use kids, right? Like kids and pets were something we found most often abusers would use, and they would say, if you try to leave, I'm gonna try to have full custody, or I'll kill your dog, right? Like anything they can do to assert control and regain control of the situation.
Yeah. Even just hearing all of that just brings a huge mix of emotions to me.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could work in that position. I would get, I think, too upset.
Yeah.
I would feel powerless. Like I want to go do something about it.
It definitely helped that we were actively doing something, right? The place where I worked, we were able to help folks file a civil protection order. We could get you in a hotel for the night. We could get you crisis counseling, legal support, food and gas and a fresh change of clothes and things like that. So it was helpful that we had like physical things that we could say, can I help you with this? So that was, if we hadn't been able to do that and you're just listening and hearing the horror, I think that would have been really challenging.
It kind of, to me, not just this job, but several of your jobs line up to me similar to having been a police officer or a nurse, where you're going to deal with some of your own challenges and trauma just from what you've seen, and not anything that you've experienced personally necessarily, but almost like PTSD just from what you've seen and been exposed to other people going through. How did you get through that? Were there challenges that you faced?
Yeah, so the term for that is vicarious trauma. So that's when it's not something that you yourself experienced, but it's there's done some interesting studies on how the brain responds. And fun fact, but your brain responds the same way to someone telling you about a traumatic incident as it does if it's actually happening to you. So your brain doesn't really care that you're not the one being hit. You're still like experiencing the same thing. And so I will never take the title of first responder. That was never something that I was. But I did feel really honored that folks were willing to share their stories. And they were, being incredibly brave and willing to say things that often I think they'd been holding on to for a long time. And so ways that I coped with that, I'm a big advocate for counseling. I think that it's a very helpful tool. I know it might not be for everybody, but the other piece is movement. Our bodies internalize trauma, and a great way to get through that is to move your body. And so, the biggest things I would say is movement and counseling.
Nice.
Yeah.
Interesting thought. I have a friend. He's a third-degree Taekwondo martial artist. He owned a school, or a business, I should say, where he taught Taekwondo in daycares. And so that just has the wheels spinning. Like, is there an area where you could bring in something like that, where they learn some physical control, and get to move their bodies? Is that something that could assist in that type of space? I'm thinking a care house learning center right now, but I'm also thinking of the job you were describing previously, and not just like a daycare setting, but bring in like martial arts. Maybe they can learn to protect themselves, but then also have that healing movement.
Yeah. So in my past job, when I was the program director at the crisis center, we did work on, various forms of movement. We did try. So the challenge with like Taekwondo or any mixed martial arts of any kind is insurance gets really scared. They get real nervous.
Yes.
And so that was definitely a barrier, because many folks would ask like, oh, I want a self-defense class, or like, I want pepper spray, or I want brass knuckles. And we're like, maybe not the brass knuckles, but we got pepper spray. So there's definitely an appetite for it. But jumping through the legal hurdles and the liability pieces is definitely challenging. The nice part is there are some great organizations in the community that say, like, even if we can't come into your space to lead a class, send your clients to us and we will give them, discounted classes or a free class or something like that to help them get back on their feet. The other thing that we were able to implement is like trauma-informed yoga, and really meeting people where they're at as far as like recognizing not everybody can move their bodies in the ways that they might need to for a formal sports type activity. And so being able to say like, hey, if you can't do this, traditional yoga move, you can sit in a chair and like, this is the posture that you can have. And it's going to kind of have the same effect. And so really being able to meet people where they're at.
Nice.
Yeah. But for the Learning Center, there's some really fascinating research on movement and trauma and also just, especially for young kids, we're focused on development, right? And gross motor development, those big motor movements are vital to the small motor movements that are important in school. And so we have a great outdoor play space. Nampa First Church, when they were building the nursery, had a good idea to say like, hey, we should probably have an outdoor playground. And they've got it nicely divided. And one half is squishy, so you can put things for the kids to climb on it. And the other half, it has carpet, so you can ride little cars and bikes around. And so one thing that we try to do as much as we possibly and safely can is get our kids outside for 30 to 45 minutes a day. And especially because at least half of our students are lower income, we know that the likelihood that they have access to green space and can be outside safely at home drops dramatically. And that is also linked to poorer mental health outcomes and poorer physical health outcomes. And so as much as we can get those kids outside and moving, even if it's in an unstructured way, the better it is for those kids. So as long as it's not too hot and not too cold, or lightning's the other big one, then we go outside.
Nice. I think I saw something recently, like a lot of cases of kids being diagnosed like ADHD inappropriately because they don't have maybe some rough and tumble or some of that physical outlet play. And that's actually highly important for learning social interaction, which you wouldn't think, okay, just movement, just rough and tumble being social interaction. But I'm curious how that affects that. Have you seen like a difference in kids when they're able to get some of, I guess, what parents would call some of their energy out, wear them out a little bit, how that actually affects social interaction?
Yeah. So homework for you, do some research on proprioceptive reflexes, because what you just talked about is like, my co-director, Kenzie, is going back to school right now. I'm vicariously learning all the things she's learning in her early childhood education master's program, but do some looking at proprioceptive responses, because what you just described is like basically saying, hey, we need to like trigger and like activate these different muscle groups in order for our bodies to regulate themselves. And so, yes, we do that. So especially in our older classes, we have structured movement time that specifically engages different muscle groups to make sure that we're helping the kids hit all of those boxes. So check all of those boxes. So in our junior kindergarten class, which is our 4 to 5 year olds, they've got a balance beam, they've got a trampoline, they've got a tumbling mat. And then they also do they call them brain exercises, but basically it's just structured movement and making sure that we're doing some like bilateral movement with our bodies and really consciously thinking about different things that we're doing, so that we can activate those in addition to the unstructured play that we have. So yeah, we've got structured and unstructured play to make sure we hit those boxes.
Nice. I'm curious if there's a difference in some of that movement in relation to other people versus doing it solo. Because like walking a balance beam is probably going to be more of a solo activity. So unstructured play, I would assume there's some interaction with other kids. But I would also assume for insurance, liability, regulation, all sorts of stuff, there's only so much you can allow versus if you could go out to a normal playground, like maybe we did as we were kids, and you might rough and tumble a little more with other kids than we can allow safely in this area. Is there differences on that?
Yeah. I mean, are you asking if we're going to let them punch each other? And
No. I know
okay.
you're not going to. But is there noticeable things where like you wish they could not punch each other, but I don't even know if I would say wrestle, but maybe for lack of a better description, wrestle, interact a little bit more?
So when we see that a kid is like seeking those things, so let's say I've got a 2-year-old kid, and my son is 2 years old. And often he, when he's inside the classroom, especially when he was younger, he would try to climb on top of things like a table and jump off of it. So that's a great sign that like he's clearly seeking that movement style, but it's not safe for him to jump off of a table for obvious reasons. And so that would be a time when, if it's feasible, then we would say, hey, we're going to go outside, and instead we're going to jump off the slide, or we're going to jump off of this plaything because I know we've got a squishy area. So typically when we see kids displaying behaviors like that, we try to find a safe alternative for them. Another great example is we have kids that, are seeking sensory input, and maybe they're kicking a friend. Well, obviously we can't have you kicking a friend, but you can kick a ball, or you can kick the wall, right? So we try to find a option that they can get the input they need without hurting themselves or others.
So redirecting specific physical stimuli that they need into a more conducive or conductive way. Mm-hmm. If I do the research you asked, which I plan to, I would probably answer my own questions, but I'm curious, some of that goes to interactions. Like I saw some research that was talking about like kids quite often seek rough and tumble play with dad more often. Like they want to do some of that wrestling. And that's where I was going with some of the interpersonal. Maybe it's not enough to kick a ball or something, but there's, I don't have all the right terms, but motor stimulation, being turned upside down, like flipping your kid over, having them walk up you, flip over, getting to turn upside down seems to have significant advantages and effects. Having that ability to interact in that way, I would imagine, is pretty limited in more like Care House Learning Center. But are there other ways they can get that? Or is that something you can advise parents? Maybe they need more of this specific physical input that we're not able to provide here. How do you bridge some of that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're at the end of the day, we're still a childcare setting, limited by the constraints of childcare. And so, we're not going to be able to replace parental figures. And that's not our goal, right? We want to be the partner with a parent, not a replacement. But I think that's where our developmental screenings and assessment tools would really come in play to say, are we noticing these behaviors that are leading us to think that perhaps the child is missing those inputs? And then leaning on, the experts that are evaluating them or coming alongside that family to say, hey, do you have recommendations for how we could improve this? Or maybe things they could do at home. And when a child is, in various therapies, those experts are pretty typically giving the parents homework to work on at home. And so if they're saying, hey, you need to flip your kid upside down, right? Then that's something they're going to advise because that's their area of expertise.
Yeah. I think my mind scatters in 50 different directions. It's hard to keep a straight line. And I'm always trying to make connections between everything. But I like hearing all those different pieces. I obviously know a little bit about martial arts. My daughter's been in Taekwondo since she was 2. So, 5 years now. And I've seen massive benefits there. But the funny thing to watch is when we go to practice, say at home, like let's say I'm going to spar her so she can practice sparring. She doesn't want to spar. She wants to wrestle. It's like she needs that extra different stimulation. The class isn't quite enough. And so it's just intriguing to me to watch the different needs that people have and the different motion stimulation. I've also been around some special needs kids that have needed more physical input. Some have needed a lot of physical input. We had one, I don't think it was at the daycare in Ohio. I want to say it might have been, I volunteered with the children's church there too. I want to say it was there that he almost needed more physical stimulus than most kids. When he got severely dysregulated, one of the things that would help was you almost made a hammock out of a blanket and you just had to swing him a little bit. Like, do you run into cases like that where you need more specific physical stimulation to help someone regulate?
Yeah. So again, that's where we're going to work collaboratively with therapists and with the parents to see what we can do within a childcare setting. And so, we may not be able to do a hammock type swing because that takes multiple people and specialized training. But maybe we can do a weighted stuffy or a weighted vest, or for example, if a child gets overstimulated by loud sounds. Childcare is loud, and you put more than one child in a room, sometimes even one in a room, it gets pretty noisy pretty fast. So having headphones accessible for them. And so yes, we offer those accommodations.
Nice. The reason that comes up in my mind a little bit is when you're talking about past trauma, especially, which anyone who's gone through foster care, I would say that's definitely traumatic. Some of the biggest traumas are death, divorce, or a move. And I would classify death slightly different here in that you can have death of relationships, even if there's not death of a person. So you can have these kids coming through a lot of trauma. A lot of mental illnesses can be kicked off by a severely traumatic event. So you look at something like bipolar is quite often triggered by a significant traumatic event. So I'm curious if you have some of these kids that are possibly coming through that, if that triggers something, and what support you have, or if there's more support that you need that people maybe could provide resources to help with something like that. Is that a huge need you've seen?
Yeah. I think where we are at in the process and how we're able to support families, often we're on the fringe of the crisis. So we're working with the families that are near crisis, but not quite there yet. And so, anytime you're asking me about what can we do to prevent those traumas from happening, I'm going to say invest in the social safety net, invest in affordable housing for all, invest in making sure that, if you're a business owner, that your wages actually are livable for your staff. I'm a big advocate that if you can't afford to do business well, then perhaps it isn't a good model, because people deserve to make a living wage. And that's really important, especially as the cost of living continues to go up. Here in Idaho, when I moved here over a decade ago, cost of living was a lot lower, and it's not today. The odds of somebody being able to afford a house and really establish is pretty low if they're just working entry-level jobs. So invest in, if you're an employer, pay your folks what they're worth, pay them a living wage. If you are a contractor or a builder or a developer, please build more affordable housing that's actually affordable. A $400,000 entry home is not affordable. I'm sorry. It's just not. And then, as far as I know that folks, especially in Idaho, but also across our nation, based on their political stances, how you choose to support your community and the social safety net may look different. So some folks are going to advocate for tax support for things like Medicaid and social programs, food stamps, Medicaid, healthcare assistance, etc. And some folks are going to say, no, I'd rather give to my local charity. Personally, whatever you decide to do it, because people are struggling. People are on the fringes and on the border of crisis each and every day. And the best thing that we can do to prevent that is to stop those crises from ever happening, and making sure that food is accessible, healthcare is accessible, housing is accessible. That is what's going to stop these families from spiraling.
If I had to sum all that up, I would say see the humanity in other people and don't quibble about how we're going to help. Just help in the way that you're able to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good summary. But your help means like action, whether that's $1 or a volunteer hour or something. Mm-hmm. But helping is not just thoughts and prayers.
No. Thoughts and prayers are good, and the one caveat I would give to that is still a balance of action. Even if you can't support financially or you're not in a position to do any of these other things, a lot of times just being a friend, someone they can lean on, someone they can trust and open up to, can be a huge help. Yeah. Even if there's nothing else you can do.
You can still be a good neighbor.
Yes.
Right? You can still show up and help carry your neighbor's groceries in, or better yet, learn the language of your neighbors, right? My neighbors are speaking Spanish and I'm working really hard to learn. It's not going great, but we're trying.
In some ways, I wish I had learned Latin. I took 3 years, or wished I had learned Spanish. I took 3 years of Latin, and it hasn't really been super applicable. I mean, it helped me with spelling, but
yeah.
I do think as a society, we've gotten much more individualistic and not communal. And I think that has been a huge detriment. And that's something I really want people to get back from different conversations I've had. You can apply that to many things. If you talk about shame, the biggest way you combat shame is actually community, relationship, realizing that there's other people that are going through what you're going through. So I'm a huge advocate of share your story, and that's something you can actually give. If you've been through something, don't take that as a point of shame. Share it. That can actually be inspiration for someone, that there is hope on the other side, that they can get through this. So I think more people need to share their stories, build that community, connect with each other. Is there anything else we missed? Because I know I skipped over your middle section on your path, but is there anything else we missed that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so. I didn't mean to knock thoughts and prayers, because I think prayer and, making sure that what we're doing in the Nazarene Church, we talk about working towards holiness, and it's like our prayers and our hearts aligning with Christ's, so that when we're acting and doing, we're doing what God's called us to do. And so I guess my only clarification is I'll take your thoughts and prayers and your actions.
Yes.
All together.
I definitely didn't take it. You were knocking thoughts.
Oh, good. Okay.
Prayer. I think too many people think thoughts and prayers are enough, and thoughts and prayers are highly important and always grateful for those, but thoughts and prayers by themselves isn't always enough.
Yep.
But
yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
I learned a lot, and that was fun. And I have a lot more research to do.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for watching the Brent and Peck podcast.